Dobrodošli u Svebih, prvi podcast sa fokusom na bosansko-hercegovačku dijasporu koji otvara prostor za važne razgovore o političkoj, ekonomskoj i društvenoj stvarnosti Bosne i Hercegovine, dijaspore i svijeta. Nastao je u okviru APU networka, mreže Bosanaca i Hercegovaca u Švedskoj, koja već 20 godina inspiriše, pokreće pozitivne promjene i pruža prilike za humanitarne i društvene aktivnosti. Cilj APU mreže je promocija i njegovanje naših vrijednosti i kulturne raznolikosti kroz sve nacije i generacije. Tokom cijele godine mi implementiramo različite projekte u cijeloj Švedskoj, a koji se tiču obrazovanja, kulture, poduzetništva i sporta. Podcast Svebih je samo jedan u nizu naših projekata sa ciljem da kroz razgovore sa intelektualcima i društveno aktivnim osobama nepristrasno informišemo, inspirišemo i povezujemo našu zajednicu te osiguramo da se glas Bosne i Hercegovine čuje, cijeni i predstavlja dostojanstveno. Stoga nas prati, slušaj, djeluj i pridruži se razgovoru i našoj mreži. Dobrodošli u našu epizodu.
Welcome back to Podcast Svebih. Today's episode is airing in English language because this conversation isn't just for Bosnia, it is for the world. We are focusing on the genocide in Prijedor, Bosnia and Herzegovina, a crime against humanity that far too many still deny or diminish. In Bosnia, we know what happened. The survivors carry it in their bones, and the diaspora knows it too, whether through direct experience or the ripple effects that shattered or shaped families, communities, and futures. And when I say genocide, I don't mean it as a feeling or a mass murder event. I mean it by definition. Deliberate, planned, long-term destruction of people and their identity, humanity, culture, and existence. This episode isn't just about what happened in Bosnia. It's a warning and a commemoration, a reflection on what's happening in the world right now, because the seeds of hatred, dehumanization, and organized violence are still being planted, and history has shown us where that can lead. On May 31st, 1992, one of the most chilling symbols of dehumanization in modern European history was imposed in town of Prijedor, Bosnia and Herzegovina. The Bosnian Serb authorities ordered the non-Serb population, primarily Bosniaks and Croats, to mark their homes with white flags or sheets and to wear white armbands when leaving their houses. This wasn't just a random act of discrimination. It was a calculated, systematic step in the execution of genocide, a campaign designed to isolate, humiliate, and ultimately exterminate a group of people based solely on their identity. In the months that followed, 4,686 people were killed or went missing in Prijedor municipality during the war, including 102 killed children. Tens of thousands were imprisoned in notorious concentration camps like Omarska and Ternopolje, where they faced torture, rape, and execution. Their remains were found in over 100 mass graves, if found at all. Today, White Armband Day stands as a global act of remembrance of those victims and as a stark warning of what happens when hatred is institutionalized and when the world looks away. White Armband Day is not just about remembering victims of Prijedor. It's about confronting the machinery of genocide, how it starts, how it escalates, and how it's denied after the fact. It reminds us that Srebrenica didn't come out of nowhere. It was built on years of smaller atrocities, normalized hatred, and the world's silence. So this episode is more than history. The symbols of genocide, denial, and erasure still persist in Bosnia, and similar patterns are unfortunately visible in other parts of the world. Acknowledging what happened in Prijedor isn't just about justice for the dead. It's about protecting the living. Therefore, in this episode, we are focusing on the power and necessity of memorial and commemoration, not only to honor victims, but also to ensure the truth is preserved and shared widely. And there is no one better to unpack this than our guest today, Dr. David Pettigrew, professor, author, and one of the leading international voices on genocide and human rights in Bosnia and beyond. Dr. David Pettigrew is a professor of philosophy at Southern Connecticut State University and a prominent scholar in genocide studies, particularly concerning 1990s genocide in Bosnia and Herzegovina. His work is characterized by direct commitment to confronting genocide, denial, advocating for survivors, and preserving the memory of victims. Pettigrew has been instrumental in efforts to combat the suppression of memorials and glorification of war criminals in Republic of Srpska. He has actively supported initiatives to designate 11th of July as Bosnian Genocide Remembrance Day in Connecticut, aligning with the international commemoration of Srebrenica massacre. His advocacy extends to international platforms. Notably, he addressed the Swedish Parliament on White Armband Day, highlighting the ongoing challenges faced by survivors. Welcome, David. Thank you so much for joining our podcast and accepting this humble invitation. I think that there is no better scholar to speak about the topic and dissect the anatomy of genocide. Thank you very much for joining and welcome.
Oh, thank you, Amina. It's great to join you on the podcast.
Thank you. I've had the great pleasure of meeting you last year in the Swedish Parliament, where you actually also spoke about the White Armbands Day commemoration. And it was really a great honor to listen to your presentation at the time. And I really hope that today we can dive into the topic similarly, but also a little bit reflect on what is currently happening in the world and why this commemoration is still important decades later. I know that you have dedicated years of your life and your life's work to Bosnia and Herzegovina, and that you are a fantastic lobbyist for justice, truth, but also using suitable terminology when raising awareness on atrocities that happened in Bosnia. You're also very present in the media space in Bosnia right now. And I wonder where do you draw all of that passion and energy to work on such topics still?
Oh, well, that's always a good question. It makes me think about, the past and how I became involved in the things we're talking about. But in general, it was from teaching my class on Holocaust and Genocide studies, which includes a part on the Bosnian genocide, and then I went to Bosnia and met young people like yourself who were working on these issues and who, as I say, you kept your heart open to the hope that telling the truth about the atrocities and the genocide could lead to justice. And I really became caught up in that mission with Bosnians, and I was also, really struck by some of the injustices related to genocide denial and the prohibition of memorialization in some of the atrocity sites, and felt that I needed to help publicize and advocate for justice.
And thank you very much for that. I think that I speak on everyone's behalf at this point when I say thank you for your work. But as I said, you are also a very important scholar who can speak about the actual terminology. And I would like to start with that. Ethnic cleansing is often framed as a removal, while genocide involves a destruction. For those listening who may not fully understand the both legal and historical difference, how would you clearly define the distinction between the ethnic cleansing and genocide? And can you explain why that difference in intent so significantly matters in the international law?
Well, this is an important question, and what I was going to say is that the genocide, of course, is a international UN Convention on Genocide from 1948 that establishes the definition of genocide, and it involving the intent to eliminate a group in whole or in part, and with the commission of 5 separate crimes, including the first one was including murder, but another one of the acts committed with intent would be to create conditions that would make it difficult for people to live under those conditions. But this is a legal definition and part of the jurisdiction of the international criminal tribunals and the International Court of Justice, or the ICC, International Criminal Court. And I think the simple answer is that ethnic cleansing is not a technical crime in the same sense. It's not something someone could be charged with or convicted of, and it's a more of a description of something that's happened. So that's the main difference is one can be charged with, say, genocide, or one could be charged with extermination as a crime against humanity, but no one's being charged with ethnic cleansing or convicted of ethnic cleansing. So it's I think that's one distinction. What was interesting in a number of cases, the tribunals would talk about ethnic cleansing and actually talk about ethnic cleansing and suggest that it was something that was committed. It was almost like genocide. In other words, they were trying to use both the phrase ethnic cleansing and the term genocide in the same sentence, but in the end, it's not. Ethnic cleansing was something that people could be charged with or convicted of. And part of the confusion, you might say, that developed historically was that there was a study done of the of articles in the New York Times about the aggression and genocide in Bosnia from 1992 to 1995, and in something like 75% of the articles, the text would include the phrase ethnic cleansing rather than the term genocide. So that was sort of an important formulation that may have influenced the way people think about it, and that was even in the UN resolutions related to Bosnia, such as Resolution 819 that established Srebrenica as a safe area. The phrase ethnic cleansing is included, so it becomes a description, a descriptive phrase rather than a legal. What would you call that? A legal fact. But the other thing I wanted to now that you're reminding me is that there's an author, Professor Adina Bećirović, who wrote a book in which she described ethnic cleansing in the way that it was used by journalists as genocide denial from the beginning of the aggression in Bosnia. So it's a very problematic term. And for example, I remember you mentioned that I'm in the media, and I remember one journalist talking to me and saying at the end, "Why didn't you talk about ethnic cleansing?" So I would have the interview was over, but I would have had to have this whole conversation that we're having to explain that distinction.
All right. Yeah, exactly. So pretty much the ethnic cleansing, using the terminology wrongly, I would say it's extremely dangerous, both because it's politically convenient and it allows states and institutions to avoid confronting the full weight of what actually is committed, and also because it's not legally binding
Right.
for the future. Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned that the states might themselves avoid using the term because then it would obligate them to intervene. This is a point that Samantha Power makes in her book, Problem from Hell, when she's actually talking about the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. And she found a document that showed that the State Department didn't want to use the word genocide because it might require the U.S. to actually do something. And later, Bill Clinton apologized specifically for failing to call it genocide. He said we should have called it genocide immediately. So that's an interesting observation you made.
Do you think that's ever going to happen with Bosnia?
That that people would say that it was finally say it was genocide in general.
Yeah.
That is, I think that I think the international community, of course, has recognized the Srebrenica genocide through, let's say, the UN General Assembly resolution recognizing July 11th as an International Day of Remembrance and Reflection. And let's say scholars and members of activist communities refer to sort of the entirety of what happened as a Bosnian genocide. In Connecticut, we have a law. I think we were the first state in the country to have a law designating July 11th as a day of remembrance, but we called it Bosnian Genocide Remembrance Day. And and I remember talking to the members of the community about what the best idea was, and they said, well, it's important to say that the entire aggression involved genocidal intent. So that's important. But I think historians and analysts refer to it as genocide.
Yeah. And in the introduction itself, I gave a very brief overview of the statistics and the facts of what happened in Prijedor. But could you please give us a very brief overview of key moments and events that led to happenings in Prijedor, to genocide, dissecting them as you would dissect anatomy of a genocide?
Well, I don't think I know exactly the dates of the progression of the assaults on the various villages and towns, or but I guess I would be able to say that there were announcements, in Prijedor that people should either wear white armbands or hang white sheets from their houses so they could be identified, which led to people being identified for transport to the concentration camps. And there were assaults on various villages and towns, and that's I don't have in my memory the exact dates of, say, the assault on civilian. There's a town or village called Hambarin, where the Armenian police of Republika Srpska attacked and then began both already killing people, but also taking them to concentration camps, and that would include also 𝐀𝐧𝐚𝐭𝐨𝐚, for example. And this was happening. People were being attacked and then being rounded up and taken to, let's say, Chernobyl or Marska in the beginning. So I think I don't know if that's what you have in mind, but if we go back before the actual violence begins, there was the political ideology of a greater Serbia, and the discussion of there was the propagation of the myth of Serb victimization that Milosevic and 𝐀𝐏𝐈𝐙𝐎𝐃𝐀 were propagating, and it was 𝐀𝐏𝐈� had gone to Prijedor and had warned Serbs not to live with non-Serbs, and their considerable propaganda, hate speech, with the idea that there would be this establishment of a greater Serbia to protect Serbs from further victimization. Of course, this was a myth. It was a political tool. I would say at the same time, there was the ideology of greater Croatia, and which would lead to the aggression in western, would be the Midwestern or Southwestern Bosnia, and in the effort to create a greater Croatia. And that was so this was, I thought, as I began talking about the early months of the assault in say Prijedor, 𝐀𝐧𝐚, Hambarin, one realizes that there's this ideological framework that's driving this, and the point, the connection I was trying to make is that one of the sort of political functionaries who was involved in the crimes at Omarska was Duško Tadić. It was one of the first cases, one of the first convictions, and he was a enthusiastic supporter of the idea of a greater Serbia, which would be in which there would be only Serbs. So this genocidal intent was already operating. This idea of a greater Serbia that would be ethnically homogeneous was already motivating Duško Tadić in the crimes of just trying to forcibly displace people from a town like 𝐀𝐧𝐚 and to then forcibly detain them in Chernobyl and persecute them. So I don't know if that's the kind of thing you're thinking about.
Yeah, exactly. So there is a planning and more of a silent announcements of something that may happen, and then there are the actual crimes, and then the hiding those crimes and the denying those crimes later. So now we are still in the phase partially of denial. Of course, the war in Bosnia was pretty much followed in real time, like we do follow wars and crimes around the world today. So we have a lot of evidence of it, but there is still this like diminishing of what happened, but also denying of what happened. And I think that it was good that you did mention that this is part of that anatomy, that the planning and also the aftermath. So considering the current political situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina that you're pretty much aware of, especially with regards to memory denial, raising nationalism again, threats to peace, unity, democratic development, do you see any similarities today in comparison to what was going on in, I would say, late 80s to early 90s?
Well, unfortunately, it seems that the ideological underpinnings of the genocide that we were talking about in the case of a greater Serbia or a greater Croatia, the ideological underpinnings have never really never really been absent, and they seem to be coming back with greater intensity. In the case of Greater Serbia, there's a kind of new formulation of establishing a Serbian world. And also shortly after the UN General Assembly passed the resolution on the Srebrenica genocide, there was an assembly, the All Serb Assembly, which was also sort of setting forth a plan for an idea of a Serbian world. And in a parallel way, the Croatian Academy of Arts and Sciences published a manifesto a few years ago, calling for the creation of a third entity in Bosnia, a kind of new Herceg Bosna that was driving the atrocities from the Croatian perspective back in the 90s. So it seems as though these ideologies have just been percolating below the surface and been with, as you point out, with denial, with the failure to accept responsibility, with the failure not just to accept responsibility, but to recognize what happened. Because I suppose one could say, could not accept responsibility, but you might at least admit that something happened. So you have this denial and the resurgence of the greater Serbia, greater Croatia politics, which imply this kind of ethnic homogeneity. But it reminded me at some point of those ideological visions. Reminded me of the Nazi say philosophy of Lebensraum, where you're clearing the land of the hated other and just creating the space for whether it's for Serbs or for Croats. So these ultranationalist policies. And but I don't know if you wanted to ask another question about the current situation, or because it seems to me that the current crisis is just an ongoing symptom of these ideologies, where you have essentially where you have Milorad Dodik essentially in a state of de facto secession, and he seems to be in alliance with the leadership of the more nationalist Bosnian Croats.
Does this maybe it's super like a personal question, but like, does this scare you? And do you think it can be sort of prevented to escalate even more? Or is it already too late because it has been planned still since 80s? And as you said, it has always been there. It's just, it was a little bit more under the carpet, I would say.
Well, it's definitely a cause for great concern. And because you have this, I'm sure the listeners would be aware of the sort of chain of events that led to, the High Representative passed a law that criminalized any laws or actions that would violate. It should be just already the violation of the Constitution or the threat to peace, but it was just anything that would violate the decision of the High Representative, and then the Bosnian Serbs immediately violated the decision of the High Representative, and Milorad Dodik was charged and eventually convicted in the first order trial, I guess we say, convicted, sentenced to 1 year, which he could appeal or pay a fine, and then I think banned from politics for 5 years. And he just immediately, in a sense, resumed resisting the authority of the state, and declared immediately that any decisions of the courts were void. It did not pertain in any way to Republika Srpska. So that's why I call it a kind of de facto secession. At the same time, threatening secession. And what people worry about quite rightly is that there could be an incident there was apparently 𝐀𝐴 went to East Sarajevo to try to arrest or take into custody Mr. Dodik, and there was a standoff. So this sort of incident could happen. I think people are concerned about that, but I think in this case it would be important for the High Representative to continue to take a strong position. On the one hand, using whatever bond powers. I think he'll say rhetorically, he'll say, "Well, we have our tools," and it's as though he's prepared to use the bond powers, maybe banning Mr. Dodik from office, as other high representatives have done for other nationalist politicians, and perhaps calling for more visible reinforcements from EUFOR in order to set a certain tone to bring stability. So it is a matter of, I think, a great concern, but I think it can be managed. It's just frustrating that the High Representative has, it seemingly thus far has done very little, either to prevent denial or to support memorialization. Because what I was alluding to earlier, or at least thinking about in my response, was that I thought it's puzzling that the first thing that Milorad Dodik has been, say, charged with and convicted of was countermanding a decision of the High Representative, when he is already engaged in genocide denial and hate speech. That was most recently. He engaged in some virulent hate speech about Bosnian Muslims, and then followed that up by saying that if everyone would just convert to Orthodox Christianity, then we would establish our goal. So in that, he's both committing, you could say, hate speech, but also reminding everybody that that's the goal of a greater Serbia.
Exactly. Yes, I'm glad that you brought it up, and I think it almost speaks for itself, the way that it was said publicly, and the goals it is having with that kind of terminology and speech. I would like to jump back to you mentioning the United Nations recognition of genocide in Srebrenica, because 30 years after the genocide, we did achieve to have that resolution. And it felt like a very big step forward. And then, of course, it's still denied and diminished. And then these issues are happening now. And I think that a lot of critics would argue that resolutions like this one on Srebrenica, are just symbolic and they lack some enforcement. So from your perspective, what are actual real-world impacts on resolutions like these? And why should the global public care about this?
Well, I think that's a good question. I feel like it's important historically that the United Nations establishes a resolution that recognizes July 11th as an International Day of Reflection, because we could live in a world where there were no resolutions of this kind. So that's important. So there's always some imperfection, you could say, in that. For example, in the convictions of criminals like 𝐀𝐧𝐚𝐭𝐨𝐢𝐤, Mladic, or Krstić, or for the perpetrators in Foča, there was always a sense that there's something that's not quite complete, but in the conviction or in the judgment. Or, for example, one thing I wrote about in an article for a law journal was to criticize the sentencing policy, where the perpetrators were given relatively short or lenient sentences, and then they were released after serving 2/3. So a number of the perpetrators were convicted. Perpetrators were released from prison, and then they returned to Bosnia to a hero's welcome. or at least they've been released from prison. And that's the case of at least two of the perpetrators in the Foča case, which was identified as a landmark ruling very proudly by the ICTY. So, but on the other hand, I wouldn't want to live in a world where people were not indicted, judged, and sentenced. So we can see a number of very important elements. So I think first it's important that we have the resolution on Srebrenica, and it's spawning other levels of awareness. For example, in Kentucky and in Missouri, in the United States, the legislators are talking about, they may have already passed them, again, establishing July 11th as a day of remembrance for the Srebrenica genocide. So having this resolution at the level of the UN and the international level would be important, that one could refer to. And it also is something that we, as human rights activists, can make it, give it meaning by talking about it, by establishing something like this podcast, or having commemorations. For example, last year the last 2 years in Connecticut, we've had public commemorations on July 11th, and all of that is kind of encouraged by the UN resolution. So I think it's both important, and it has substantive importance, and it also generates the possibility of raising awareness. And I was thinking, for example, in St. Louis, there's a whole series of events that are planned to commemorate the Srebrenica genocide this year. And in part, it's because of the 30th year, and also in part, it's because of the resolution. Well, I spoke on April 6th at the St. Louis Holocaust Museum about the Srebrenica genocide, for example, and it was with a lot of members of the Bosnian community were there, but one might say more importantly, there are many members of the members of the museum and supporters of the museum who were there, who didn't know anything about the Bosnian genocide until they came to this program. And that was just the first of a series of events in St. Louis. And I have a feeling that this is happening all over the world. So we have this challenge to raise awareness and tell the truth, but also hope that it's happening and changing people's minds.
Thank you. That is very nicely said. It's the hope. It's a good opportunity. But do you think that the commemoration and raising awareness can also support justice?
Well, in a sense, I'm afraid I can't quote 𝐿𝐼𝐵𝐷𝐲𝐢𝐻 precisely, but he said that that it's important to remember the victims, if we don't remember the victims, it's like they've been killed a second time, and it's the final victory of the perpetrator if we allow them to be forgotten. So it's important to remember and honor the memory of the victims, and he saw that, and I see that as a matter of justice. So and I think that's why the commemorations are important, especially in the face of what you were discussing earlier, or mentioning the problem of denial, because we have these what's called them atrocity sites in Republika Srpska, where people were murdered or tortured, and the local authorities, I'm sure this is well known to your listeners, are preventing survivors from even putting a simple plaque in the location. And in some cases, the facilities where the building where the atrocities happened are being completely neglected, and they're deteriorating and could literally collapse and kind of erase the memory of the past. So in this case, the holding the commemorations is kind of an act of justice it is trying to resist denial and ensure that the victims are remembered. I'm thinking of two locations, two examples. One is in 𝐂𝐏𝐈𝐙𝐎𝐃𝐀, where there's a concentration camp that is called Barutni Magazine, and there was the main camp in the school in town in 𝐂𝐏𝐈𝐙𝐿𝐃, and then from that camp and from other locations, men were taken to Barutni Magazine before being taken to execution sites. And so by talking about Barutni Magazine, I don't want to forget that you had more than one concentration camp and Barutni Magazine, but also 4 or 5 execution sites. And I went to the commemoration last year. In the course of the day, we visited the different execution sites and detention sites, and had sort of commemorative activities and remarks and prayers in all these locations. So there's not just Barutni Magazine, but it's an example of one of these sites where the building is deteriorating, and the local people are using it as a barn for their animals, and which is very disrespectful. So it's important that the Survivors Association, are carrying out these activities to try to raise awareness and to eventually bring justice. And I was hoping, we did meet with the Office of the High Representative a couple of times, and then and then representatives from the Office of the High Representative came to the commemoration last year. But for some reason, that the High Representative is not willing to use the bond powers to establish these sites as protected, national memorial sites, in the same way that Srebrenica Memorial Center is protected. So, but that's one example. And the other example that I was hoping to mention was the 3 or 4 sites where people were murdered that were part of the convictions for genocide in Srebrenica. And we think of the Srebrenica Memorial Center and the cemetery as important, proof, and it's sort of the center of gravity for remembering genocide around the world. I think the Srebrenica Memorial Center is becoming a kind of center of gravity for other museums and activists around the world. But just nearby Srebrenica in Zvornik, for example, there's the Pilica Cultural Center, Branjevo Farm, and Petkovci Dam, where people were murdered as part of the Srebrenica genocide, and no memorial is permitted. And the Pilica Cultural Center is I'm comparing it to Barutni Magazine. It's something that where nothing's been done to protect the building, and it's literally the roof is literally falling in. The walls are riddled with bullet holes. It's as though this happened yesterday, and the only evidence that there's been that the only thing that's happened there is that the mothers have visited every year and left flowers. I went there last August with my son and left and put flowers in memory of the victims. So I could see the condition the building is in, and it wasn't possible to enter. There's a hole in the side of the building that one can go through if it's there. But as a ongoing part of that story, there was a documentary film crew that visited recently, and the police ejected them from the site or didn't give them access. And when the Memorial Center called the mayor's office in Zvornik to ask about access to the building, they were told that nothing happened there, so there was no reason to go there. Yeah, that was the response. So this is the level of denial. And the other location that when I said there are 3 to 4, I was thinking of the Kravica warehouses, where no memorial has been permitted. but also in that case, the exterior of the building has been repaired. The facade has been repaired so that there's no evidence that anything ever happened there.
Yeah, that is unfortunate reality of Bosnia. But just thinking about Sarajevo, which is my hometown, there is a memorial of what has happened pretty much at every step along the way. Still, like as you mentioned, these like bullet holes in the buildings and the streets. We have Sarajevo roses. We have, I think, the memorial, although it would be very important to have an official place as a memorial. I must say that we are still working really hard to be the memorial of what is going on with our speeches. And I'm not meaning only Bosnian people or Bosnian diaspora, or but also like everyone who really feels that justice in general is important and speaking about these topics is important. And that is also a form of memorial that we are leaving as legacy for the future. And I kind of want to bring this up because our viewers still should feel like they have a responsibility as well to contribute to commemorating and raising awareness about these topics. And I would like to use maybe the rest of our time to also then maybe correlate Bosnian genocides and what has happened there with actual current real-time problems that we are having in the world. I mean, given the current geopolitical climate, and also watching live in real time atrocities happening all around the world, do you believe that we learned anything from Bosnia? Or are we witnessing the same mistakes being repeated just in new forms?
Well, I think that's an important question, and it made me think about something that I wanted to add to my previous comment, and that is that the denial of genocide and the prohibition of memorials in the location I was talking about is in part it's a proof of the genocidal intent, because the people who lived in these areas were forcibly expelled, and now the authorities in Republika Srpska are doing everything they can to keep them from coming back. One thinks that with one would hope that with the installation of memorials and accepted practices of commemoration, that people would then feel comfortable to return to the homes from which they were expelled. But this, but the genocidal intent, I call it the demographics of genocide, or it could be part of the anatomy of genocide. That you had, there was something like 60% of the population was Bosniak, and now only 2% would be Bosniak in a place like Foča or Kalinovic. Well, but I think your question is one that really has to be posed to humanity. That have we learned, not just from Bosnia or from the Holocaust or from the Cambodian genocide or the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda or the Bangladesh genocide? What have we learned when that there's international aggression and war crimes being committed on a daily basis?
How effective do you believe that today's international courts and mechanisms are in prosecuting crimes against humanity, considering what's happening in Gaza and Sudan, Myanmar, etc.? And how do you assess the legacy of ICTY and also the limitations today of the international criminal courts?
Well, I think part of the again, I guess we were saying we would not want to live in a world without an international criminal court. On the other hand, it seems to be powerless in certain respects when, for example, it can indict Putin but not apprehend him or prosecute him. And also, I guess it it's in part that because Russia, the Russian Federation, is not a signatory to the ICC, nor is the United States. And I thought it was catastrophic when President Trump issued an executive order of sanctions against the International Criminal Court, preventing them from visiting the United States. I think that was part of the sanction. I'm trying to remember the full sanction. So I saw that as undermining the rule of law, on a kind of global scale. But it's important that that South Africa brought the case to the ICJ against Israel, and so that's important. I mean, I don't know, those cases take a long time to be decided, and there's such a human cost, an unspeakable cost of the destruction of Gaza, the total, what I call this total catastrophe, total destruction of the infrastructure of people's lives, of the world that existed in the meantime while the case is going on. And one of the elements of the proceedings is that and now I'm forgetting the most important thing. There's these provisional rulings that are made along the way by the court. While they haven't yet decided the case, they'll say that Israel has to do everything it can to protect human life so that it doesn't run the risk of committing genocide, something like this. So there have been 4 or 5 of these provisional rulings that Israel has ignored completely. But it's possible that by ignoring those provisional rulings, that they're making the case, they're sort of reinforcing the case against Israel, and so I think that's important. But I feel like the level of destruction in Gaza is catastrophic, and that there has to be some kind of accountability in the long run. And I feel like it's something that we could say is worse than genocide, if such a thing is possible. The invasion of the illegal invasion of Ukraine is another example. But we had a meeting at Yale recently, Yale Genocide Studies program, and there was a panel with experts reporting on basically South Africa's case against Israel in the ICJ. And one of the conclusions that was being suggested is that there needs to be a greater development of a international treaty on crimes against humanity. So there's an international treaty on genocide, but not on crimes against humanity. So because they think they're suggesting that some opportunities for prosecution and conviction are lost because of that. And I never thought of that. I know it's a crime that can be, but there isn't an international treaty on crimes against humanity whereby a state could bring a case to the ICJ.
It reminds me from our conversation from the very beginning about how much terminology can have a terrible effect on the actual outcome of what we're trying to achieve. So, yeah. But now that you're talking, you were mentioning about crimes against humanity and survival in general of humanity, or destruction of one's identity. How do you, as an expert and a philosopher, view the survival of Universal Declaration of Human Rights?
Well, it's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is probably a good example of what we were talking about, because it has no legal standing, right? It was developed, I think, with the purpose of encouraging, raising awareness, educating about the importance of human rights. And in these challenging times, I think we have to. It's good to come back to this document. I did this recently in my one of my classes with the students, where they're writing about a philosopher that probably few people hear about or read anymore, but Immanuel Kant, who was talking about the kind of universal aspect of being human that was part of the evolution of the of thinking and literature about universal human rights. And so my students had to cite both the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Declaration, I think it was the Declaration of the Rights of Man from France in 1785 or 1789. And so I think it's important to make it part of public discourse. And it's a challenge every day. We could say in the United States, we're having attacks on people are being persecuted, and it's difficult to typify the kind. But people with it seems to be they're not refugees. They're green card holders. They're students with visas. A lot, and they're being apparently, apprehended, taken into custody, and risking deportation. And the only thing, it seems the only thing holding the line are members of the legal community and human rights community who are trying to prosecute and defend the human rights, which are based on these ideas advanced by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so there are some victories where people have been released from custody and are able to go back to their families and jobs. And so that's I'm glad you thought of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because it does include the right of the freedom of movement, which is also ingrained in the Dayton Peace Accords in Annex 7 that ensures the right of return. It's just that on the ground you have the authorities in Republika Srpska, for example, doing everything they can to prevent people from returning through methods of either outright discrimination or psychological intimidation.
Is there anything that we, as a population, and also the international community, that we can do to ensure this protection and enforcement also of the Human Rights Declaration? In practical terms, what would come to your mind that we can do better?
Well, in a way, I don't want to be able to answer that question, because I think it's something we all need to figure out. But I do think that there is some evidence that by writing letters to international officials about these issues, that we can make a difference. So, I hadn't thought of that, but writing to the Supreme Court in the United States, or writing to the European Commission, the Council of Europe, to the Secretary of State of the United States, writing to officials and setting forth an argument for human rights, for the right to memorialization, the right to self-determination on all these different levels. I think constantly giving voice to the values of human rights and human freedoms and memorialization would be important. And as we said earlier in the podcast, having hope that this could make a difference, because there are letters that people write that are received, and then people in positions of power respond favorably. But also there's a community process involved that's organizing the community towards political and cultural action. So I think it's something we have to do, and something that we're doing through something like this podcast to hopefully I'm contributing in some way.
Definitely. Yes, I would. I would agree with you. There is always, we all have some form of responsibility to take an action, and sometimes it's on a larger scope, but we can also see that it's on a smaller scope as well. It can make a very big effect long term. It's like the butterfly effect, right? Maybe before we end this episode, I would just like to see your view on the upcoming commemorations of the genocide in Prijedor, but also genocide in Srebrenica. So we have the 31st of May for Prijedor, and then 11th of July for Srebrenica. Do you see any concerns related to these upcoming commemorations, considering the current geopolitical situation, and also the challenges?
I think that this is a very good question, and I think, I was talking to the association it's called Association 𝐀𝐏𝐈𝐙𝐎𝐃𝐀 about the upcoming commemoration, about what we would expect, and the response was, that we have to do it. So there's no turning back. We have to follow through with the plan. And I feel the same way about Omarska and Srebrenica and then Omarska. So I think, but on some level, I think on the ground there are levels of communication between peoples and authorities that should make it possible for these commemorations to proceed this year, in spite of the rhetoric coming from Milorad Dodik. And I think, as Samir Ivanovic said, we have to do it. There's no turning back. So it's important to remember the victims and to raise awareness.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's a very great message in the end, like a take home as well for this. And I would kind of like to just use the opportunity to invite, because I'm hoping that this podcast is viewed internationally, especially now that it's in English language, in comparison to other podcasts that I've done before, and will be also doing some of them in Bosnian language. I would like to invite people to, of course, research, but also to commemorate, to join different programs. In Sweden alone, there will be some different programs that we will be organizing for both 31st of May, but also commemoration of Srebrenica, and it is happening across the globe, as I could hear. And also to do little things, such as, for example, like you have a flower of Srebrenica behind you as well. Like that is one of the symbols of remembrance and commemoration. Also wearing a white armband on 31st of May. And of course, to continuously show solidarity to people today, to victims, to these victims who have the ripple effect of all of these atrocities that are happening all around the world, and to speak up and take care of mental health and people around them. Would you like to add something more on that invitation, I would say?
Well, it reminds me that I'm traveling to Stockholm tomorrow for two events. One is to remember for White Armband Day, which is organized in cooperation with the parliament. It's Swedish. It's Riksdag, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And so that's important. There'll be members of the Bosnian community and also diplomatic community present for this White Armband Day under the auspices of the parliament, and then the next day there's a international conference on conflict-related sexual violence involving Bosnia, Ukraine, and Kosovo. So very profoundly important topic. So there are conferences and workshops and events happening, and yes, it's important to reach out and get involved. Everybody can't be involved all the time, but people can. But it's important to try to communicate, to network, and participate as much as possible.
I agree. Thank you very much for participating in this podcast episode and responding to our invitation and really giving an amazing overview of the current state of the world and why commemoration is important. Because although it is a history, nothing seems to be distant history as long as it's the problems of it are still alive. And I would like to end maybe with a little summary of what you said, or a little keynote that you mentioned during the episode, and that is that commemoration keeps justice alive. And I thank you so much for being part of this, and I invite everyone to follow our podcast, and we will be talking more about this topic, especially in regarding Srebrenica genocide in the following months before 11th of July. Thank you very much, and see you in the next episode.
Thank you, you and all your colleagues for all your work. Thank you.
Thank you.